process. How are you this evening?
I'm good, Rabbi. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. A little bit stuffed up, but it's only a cold. It's only a cold. So
Good.
how long have you been a member of Temple Emmanuel?
We lived in Pittsburgh about 5.5 years, and I became a member the second week we were in Pittsburgh because we needed a place to have my daughter be a bat mitzvah. So, and I was going to live in the South Hills. And then we came and we just loved Temple so much, and we've made some really nice relationships, and we've just been really blessed to be a part of the community.
And we're so excited to have you. And how apropos that's what brought you to Temple as your son prepares for his bar mitzvah.
Yeah, let's get there.
Right? Exactly. It's coming soon.
See what that's going to be like.
But the subject for the evening, I put a copy up on the screen for everyone to see it, and I've got my copy right here. You are an author, and author of Haven's Point. When did you start writing?
Actually, I've been writing unsuccessfully since I was about 23 years old. I tried to write a book then. The first book that I started writing Haven's Point about 10 years ago, and then dropped it, and then started it, and dropped it, and started it. And actually, I wrote a book in between about 3 years ago. It was my first published book called Crazy in Babylon. And I was really encouraged by Crazy in Babylon. It got 5 stars on Amazon, over 50 reviews. It had a lot of momentum. And then someone said, it was actually my wife, Heather, who said, why don't you finally go back to Haven's Point and finish it? And I did. And over a year, I took really finishing it up. I sent it to an editor. The editor helped me, both a story editor and a literary editor. And what ended up happening was I feel like I told the story I really wanted to tell. And Jonathan, the main character, was born into the world for everyone to see. And it was really important to me that people meet Jonathan.
It's an incredible process to go from having an idea in your mind and beginning this labor of love to running it through editors and other people for reviews and opinions and opinions and opinions and opinions.
Oh, it's something else. And you don't always want to hear the opinions. I mean, that can be such a challenge. It's like if you're an artist or you're a performer and people critique your work, it's like anything. I mean, I know the high holidays just happened, and I'm sure people loved or critiqued your sermons. Although I always loved your sermons.
Good save. This, we are definitely the same.
In anything that you do that's a creative endeavor, people are going to have opinions about your work. And my editor, both the story editor and my editor, both really helped me see the depth of what the story could be for Haven's Point. And I was really able to delve deep. I have a very dear friend who's an author as well. He's a very successful author. And he always told me, you figure it out about on your 5th book how to write a book. And every time you keep going more and more and more. And what's funny is Haven's Point was actually my first real endeavor to write a book. It wasn't the first one I finished. It was my first endeavor to really write a book. But having gone back now, having had some successful writings and projects before that, I was really able to delve back and say, okay, this is what I want the characters to be. This is what I want the arcs to be. This is the story I want to tell. Haven's Point does have some violence in it. And, whether I toned that down and did much more creative character work, it was really important to me to keep it about character. And I would never have been able to do that without, Crazy in Babylon coming out a couple years ago, or the advice of my story editor. And was just brilliant for what she had to say.
And definitely one of the parts that I loved the most about this book was the character development. You invest a lot of time in telling their stories, both through dialogue and description. Your main characters are rather flawed human beings. Is that simply the human situation? Is that a response to the Civil War time period? Tell me more about that.
Actually, that's a great question, because I seem to. I'm flawed. I think we're okay. So everybody's flawed. Everything I've ever written seems to have these flawed characters, and I think that's what makes literature or movies or anything interesting, is that you have a flawed character, they work through something, they go through hell, and then they come out the other side feeling better. No one usually wants to end on a bad note. At least I don't like to. My flawed characters always are working through something I believe are significant. That's how I like to write. In the case of Jonathan Abraham, who's the protagonist in this book, he's been through hell. I couldn't write in many cases just how hellish his existence had been for the 10 years prior to the book starting. It was very difficult to write at times. I wanted it to be believable and did a lot of research about what those times were like in terms of, and I don't want to spoil anything, but what his road was both spiritually. And that's the premise of the book is you take a Jewish general who was on the side of the Confederacy and what would happen to him if he were placed in certain positions and asked to do certain things, like certain horrible things, because those who were believers in Christ, like General Lee, who were adamant evangelicals, and Stonewall Jackson, who was known for his spirituality and his belief in Jesus, and it almost became an obsession. You know, the idea that Jonathan, because he's Jewish, necessarily didn't have the soul to save, so he could go out and do things that they otherwise wouldn't want to do because they were afraid their soul would be headed towards damnation. And I've been rereading it with someone recently, and when I got to that part in the book, they said, "Oh my God, that's horrible." I said, "Yeah, that's the point. It's horrible. You know, it's not anti-Semitism. It's an idea that we as Jews, since we don't believe in hell or the concept of hell, or belief that by accepting something, you're automatically saved and go somewhere. It's this idea that's very different. And I'm trying so hard to write my Jewish story. And in fact, my parents have a friend who read the book, and she was extraordinarily kind in what she said about the book after she read it, except she wrote me a note after, and she said something, it doesn't even matter what she said, but it had to do with the religious part of the book. And she is, I'd say, somewhere between conservative and modern Orthodox. And she's very observant. And her knowledge of Judaism and the Torah specifically is quite large. And she asked me a few things about my view. And this is the interesting thing. It wasn't, was I right or wrong? It's that our viewpoints were different. It's that she believed Judaism to be one way, and I believe Judaism to be another way, because that's my belief system. And Jonathan has my belief system.
Sure. It is the story you get to tell. I'm excited to be here this evening with congregant and author Darrin Friedman talking about his book, Haven's Point. So the Jewish character of Jonathan, as you've explained, makes a lot of sense. Tell me about the Civil War aspect. Have you always had an interest in the Civil War, or in history, or in historical fiction? How did that piece come into play?
It's not historical fiction, because my other books are all modern day. I have a thing for Civil War. I've always been fascinated by it. I've always been fascinated by President Lincoln, President Grant, and the way it's apropos for how I feel about things now. I don't think there's necessarily going to be a second Civil War, but there was a time, I think it was in 1859, where one congressman from the South hit another congressman from the North with his cane on the Senate floor, having to do with an argument over slavery. I don't think anyone's hitting each. I don't think, you know, well,
I hope you are right, but
I
it does
hope they're
feel like a
not hitting each
perilous
other.
time.
Right. I hope they're not. But obviously, the divisiveness in our country right now is so palpable and it's so horrible, and it's coming up on election time. And please, everyone, vote. My fascination with the Civil War has always been about the characters involved in it. It's interesting. Obviously, I have my belief system. I think the idea of slavery was abhorrent, and the Confederacy itself was flawed to its very core. And I never necessarily believed in states' rights. I've always believed in the Union. To this day, I always believe that, I'm an Obama Democrat, and I believe that as a whole, the country's better when the federal government can help through its vast means to help everyone instead of leave anyone behind. And that kind of, what's so interesting in this book is I took someone and made them a Confederate. And it's not because I believe in the Confederacy. It's because I wanted people to understand that the Jews lived in the Confederacy too and were Confederates. The Secretary of State in the Civil War, during the Civil War, was Judah Benjamin. He was a Jew, and he was Secretary of State for the Confederacy. So these are real stories. These are real people. There was never any Jew general of the South, but there were people in the South who were Jewish fighting for their state, which they always thought of as their country.
Knowing that both Judaism and the Civil War are passions of yours, does that make it easier or harder as you are both developing these characters, developing the story, but then also getting feedback to improve upon it? Your creative process, do you have to write about something that you feel passionately about? Or is that just what comes quickest to the pen? Or quick is not the right word, but most eloquently to the pen?
I've written for a long time. I was a writer. I used to write, I was in the real estate industry for about 20 years in an executive level, and I used to write for Realtor Magazine. I used to be very involved in commentary from a national standpoint in the industry, and I used to write all the time. And I used to write about, although it was work, I used to write about subject matter that I was passionate about. I have been asked at times to write on matters that I'm not passionate about, and that was so much harder. If you're not passionate about the story or the characters you're writing about it, don't write it. You have to love what you're writing. I go back to Haven's Point specifically. There are characters that I love. Clarissa Toms, who is the main female character, she's completely fascinating to me as a woman and as a person. And especially at that time, I wrote her to do things that no woman would be allowed or would it be socially acceptable to do. I wrote a very strong woman, and my wife says it all the time. I seem to always write strong women. I married a strong woman, so that would make sense. I married an amazing woman who's amazingly independent, who believes that we should all have the right to do anything we want, and we're raising our daughter to be a completely independent thinker. And that's what these characters are. Take the violence out, take anything else out, but at its core, these characters, female or not, are extraordinarily focused on being three-dimensional and having something to say that means something.
So I'm here this evening with Congregant and author Darrin Friedman talking about his book Haven's Point and the creative process around it. Tell us a little bit more about your creative process. Are you I understand that Brandon Sanderson sits down for a certain period of time and then he writes and then he stops for the day every day. Are you, able to get into that type of routine, or is it more when the muse is with you, away you go, and then there's a dry spell?
I'm very blessed that I am able to consider myself a full-time writer and author. I take care of my children during the day, and while they're at school, I'm able to write. I like to write every single day. In terms of the creative process, some authors will tell you don't write a word until you've outlined everything out, so you know exactly where your story's going at every minute of every time during the creative process. I don't like to do that because I don't want to stifle myself in case I have an idea and it takes me another way. I don't want to be boxed in on something that I've written 3 months ago that might take a completely different turn. I will, however, like I'm writing a book now, which is I'm writing a 3-part series for Crazy in Babylon. The sequel's coming out soon, and then the 3rd book I'm working on now, and I'm taking it in acts. So I know exactly how the book is going to end. I know the last scene of the book, and I just have to get there. And so I wrote Act 1. Act 1 is finished. I knew the outline basically for Act 1, and then I added and I subtracted some. Now I have no idea what's going to happen in Act 2. That's why it's so weird. I know exactly how the whole book is going to end, but I got to get through Act 2 and 3. So would it be wise to sit and write a complete Act 1, 2, and 3 outline? For some authors, that's vital. For me, I like to have more freedom. I like to write about 2,000 words a day if I can. But I read somewhere, if you write a sentence, the sentence turns into a paragraph, the paragraph turns into a page, and the page turns into a couple pages, and you just keep going that way. You just have to write that first sentence. And some days you don't want to write, and you just gotta do it, because maybe you'll figure something out that day. And during the creative process, what I've learned recently is I spend a lot of time on character, not inside the manuscript, but outside the manuscript. So I'll have a whole section. I use a really cool software that's a writing software for authors. It's called Scrivener. So if anybody wants to look that up, they can. The section on character sheets, you basically, and what I do is I write everything about a character before I write it in the story. So if I know there's Jonathan Abraham, I can write a scene with Jonathan Abraham in it. But if I don't know his entire background, and I don't know how tall he is, I don't know what his eye color is, I don't know how much he weighs, I don't know what happened before the war, it would be such a disservice to the reader that I didn't have real depth of knowledge when it came to my protagonist. So I think that if you can really take the time to write about your characters outside of your manuscript, that's of great importance, and more so for me doing that than any kind of outline. But write every single day. And if you're writing only character sketches, that still counts.
Absolutely. It is an interesting time to be writing, and I imagine many times are interesting, but with how quickly the field of publishing and books and ebooks and self-publications, and it's just the Wild West. And I'm curious to learn a little bit more about that. How did you find an editor you wanted to work with? How did you say, I'm going to do this, even if it feels like the process may be a little crazy?
Right. It's the process was crazy. Crazy in Babylon did not have a professional. My wife helped me a great deal with it, and she's a professional editor, but it didn't have a story editor, and it didn't have a professional literary fiction editor. This time, for Haven's Point, my wife and I decided to invest in the story because it took so long and so much of my heart to write it. And I'm eternally grateful to her that she invested that to do, because it's not cheap. So I did a lot of research and I found the right person. Then you have a relationship with that person through a story edit, which basically means they read it and they say, yeah, okay, so you need to do this, and this to make your story any good, but good first try. So then you go back and you do all the stories parts that you do, and the last thing is putting in the commas and the in the periods. That's the last thing that happens, and the most important part is the story edit. However, to move along with your point, actually, it's funny. I'm sitting here at my desk, so you can see how thick this book is. This is the Writer's Market Workbook. It has every agent and every literary agent and publishing house in the country. And I bought it because I was told that if I sent it out to a certain amount of people, it would really take traction. So I got a response from two different agents, and they both said they love the story, but no one is publishing Civil War stories right now. So it's like, fine, I'll just publish it myself, which I did with Crazy in Babylon, and I was very successful with that. I had an audiobook version. It's still available. You can look it up. There's an audiobook version. There's an ebook version, a Kindle version, and the physical book. And I feel I have so much more control over what happens. It was never about, would it be great if I saw my book in Barnes & Noble one day? I think that would be wonderful. I think that would be so cool. Would it be wonderful I was on the New York Times bestseller list? I think that's unrealistic. I think it would be great if a couple people read it and a couple people liked it, and they let me know that it meant a lot. And I have one friend in particular who is a creative director of a theater. And her opinion, she reads every play. She went to a fabulous school, and she's well read, and she's extraordinarily intelligent. And when she called me afterward, and she didn't say, "Hey, it was good, really good job." It wasn't like that. I think we talked for 45 minutes about my characters. That meant more to me than anything you could possibly imagine. If 20 strangers, I'd rather be, there's a musical with a song in it, I'd rather be 10 people's favorite person than 100 people's acquaintance, basically is what the song's about. I'd rather have 10 people love my book than 100 people say, it was good. And I know, because people have contacted me, that they really do love the book. And it just means so much to me that they do, because it's not for everybody. But it's really about the characters. It's not about the Civil War. It's really about the characters. The Civil War just happened to be a time period that I put it in. And it could have been in any wartime. It could have been in any wartime.
And it is the characters that really shine through, and hearing that someone so into the world of plays and live theater, you have many of those trappings here as well, right? There are sections where the past is being brought into the present in a way that would require a little bit of negotiating, but they're such rich and vibrant characters and dialogue. It seems like it would fit in that realm as well. And I know theater is something really important to your family.
Yeah, and it's hard, by the way, when you bring the past back into the story, to explain why the characters are making the decisions that they're making today. I think it's really important. It happens to be a trait I do a lot in my books. I always go back and explain why these characters do what they do. I lost my train of thought, but if if that happens and you can explain why a character does something, not telepathy say it and have people experience it with them, then I think it only makes for better characters.
Absolutely. So, Haven's Point, available on Amazon. That link is right above where you are watching this, and we would absolutely encourage you to check it out on Kindle in paperback form. Darrin, I'm so glad that we had this opportunity to talk this evening. So glad we had a chance to discuss your book, which I enjoyed reading myself, and I really appreciate this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Pleasure.